Tova Sherman. You are an award-winning CEO and international inclusion expert with 25 years of expertise in the field of diversity and inclusion. And you are the author of the book Win, 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 the 18 Inclusion-isms You Need to Become a Disability Confident Employer. Teva, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Elaine.
So you made a claim that we need to become more inclusive. And I think this is a tendency that we are having in spite of the news of discrimination here and there. I think we are moving in the right direction. And I'm happy that you're gonna share your perspective with us. I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit about your background. How do you get into this field? Your career, I know that you come from a big family, you had to fight for your place.
Maybe that's why I'm such a good fighter when you're the youngest of 5 in a family. But more importantly, thank you so much again for that question. I'm very inspired by my family. As you mentioned, I did grow up in a big family, and my mother was always believed in community service. My father was always, volunteering to do something. And as the youngest, all of my siblings were also very engaged in community. So for me, it was actually a very natural progression to shift into community work. Now, on a more personal level, as a person with disability, I live on the Adhd spectrum. And, I always like to describe the Adhd spectrum as a rainbow, maybe without all the color. So at the beginning of the rainbow, we have a mild version of that spectrum. In the middle, we have, a medium, maybe more severe, but not so severe. And then at the other end of the rainbow, quite frankly, we have very severe. I happen to be quite severe on the ADHD spectrum. As a result, ADHD is often comorbid or comes with mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, all of that. So the interesting thing about my background on a very personal level is, in addition to being a person who's on the ADHD spectrum, I happen to live with mental illness, which is the only thing at this time in my life I have to deal with. Because the ADHD, when you become a public speaker, it's kind of, you want to talk about win, win, win. You make a person with ADHD a speaker, we love to talk. Right. So it's a good match. You put me in a library, I might need to really reflect on choices. So more importantly, with a combination of therapy and medication, I've been able to work with both my mental health challenges and where I am on that ADHD spectrum. But the rest of my family, Alain, also live with disability. So here I am coming out of this place thinking it's no big deal, right? My father has kidney issues. My mother lost her voice box, talks like Stephen Hawking, I used to say, very smart with this voice box. And my brother had Crohn's and so on. And what I learned was that who cares? We're all just trying to make it work. We all want to make a good living. We all want to do things. And then I discovered, really, as a young adult, being more exposed to the general population and traveling, how completely isolated and how intense the bias against persons with disability was. And finally, the big aha for me, how few of us are in the workplace as a result, not of our capacity, but the bias that exists in people's minds around what disability means.
Wow. Okay. So you just started by saying that you suffer from some kind of disability.
Absolutely.
And you are not someone wouldn't be able to tell by looking at you. You look
That's
like
right.
A perfectly able person. Can you tell us if there is any major difference in employment between people with visible disability and those with non-visible disabilities?
Let me put it this way. People who have a disability and say so, whether because it's physical or they could not work without acknowledging it because of the need for some accommodation. So we want to include them too, because in a sense, they've been outed not necessarily by the visibility of it, by their desire to communicate it so that the accommodation is in place. The reality is that there is a almost 50% difference between employment of people with disabilities who are ready, willing, and able, and the employment of people who do not have disabilities. And that shows the bias, and I'll even say the word the prejudice, because we make so many assumptions, Alain, about what disability is and is not, that we have kind of mythed or freaked ourselves out to the point where we'd rather not deal with it as employers, and certainly within the workplace, let alone society that excludes people.
And
Don't,
are there levels of acceptance of disability? For example, you are wearing glasses, and me too, I wear glasses, and this is a disability. Without my glasses, I cannot read. So I am practically disabled, but no one would think of me twice as a disabled person just because I need glasses. So I wonder if there are just several levels of this is an accepted disability that we don't care about, but no, that one is just too much for us to handle.
right. So you're asking for the tipping point of when it becomes something that you just might need as a normal person who has no challenges other than he can't drive without, or I can't read without my readers. I certainly do not identify with my visual impairment as being a disability, because it is mild in comparison to the scope one would measure visual impairment. There are measurements. What is legally blind? What is visually impaired? How much vision do you have? That's the question that allows us to determine if this is a generalized go to your optometrist like everybody else, or if you're in a low vision area that now moves you into disability. So there are clear parameters, more or less. I like to say to people, if you have a diagnosed disability, meaning you didn't just read up on the Facebook and decide you have something, which I'm very fearful of, because I'm constantly getting these ideas from people of what they think they have because they read an article. And, for people who live with an anxiety level that's much higher than average, again, that would be a problem. And so I just want to say, getting us back to the point, that there are so-called measures. But what I do want to say about that is, and I think you bring a very good point to the table, is that the perception of workplaces and the general public is, if I don't see it, it doesn't really exist. Great example. My husband was in a terrible car accident before I met him, and he broke his back, and it took him 3 or 4 years to get back on his feet. And whenever he goes to a job, now he's like, looks like a football player, my type, nice 52, broad chest and all that. So he'll walk into a job, he'll honestly tell the manager, clear up, cannot pick over 20 pounds. No, I look like a linebacker. Can't help it. Car accident. Employer's very empathetic. Well, you're not saying that you have a problem that I can't handle. I don't want you to carry, so it's easy. Meanwhile, every day at work, everyone goes, why can't you help Joe? Why can't you help us today? What's wrong with Joe? And it begins a process.
Wow.
What happened there? What was the breakdown there, Alain? The manager doesn't know how to communicate out. And the team, and I always say this in my book, I say this, one of my 18 inclusionisms to get you ready to be disability confident is the fish stinks from the head. Now, maybe that's a maritime thing because I'm from Nova Scotia, but let me tell you, it's very clear what I'm saying. If there's a cultural issue with people going, why does she have a window? Because she's visually impaired. Why does she have a window and I don't get one? The manager's responsibility is to communicate that when it's their turn to have an accommodation, you'll be there for them, rather than this competitive, she gets it, I don't.
Wow. How about disabilities that are visible but don't interfere in your job whatsoever? Let's say I'm in a wheelchair, but I'm a programmer. The fact that I'm in a wheelchair doesn't interfere with me creating some amazing codes and apps and whatever. But is that still an issue?
Oh, without a doubt. If people are aware, they fear what could happen. I always say we're watching too much Law and Order from the States because everybody thinks they're going to get sued if someone with a disability, falls down. Everyone's going to fall down. And if anything, people with disabilities are more careful, more aware, and more conscientious because they have to be. The benefits so outweigh every study. I mean, I could sit here and read studies to you, one after another, Harvard, McKinsey and Company, DuPont, TF DuPont, all kinds of special, strategic groups, brain trusts, you name it. And they all say the same thing. People who have inclusive businesses are doing so much better financially than people who don't. So what's the problem? Well, Elaine, I hate to tell you, it's prejudice. It's
Wow.
because we don't teach people that, oh my gosh, one of my favorite inclusionisms in the book. Everyone will have had, has, or will have a disability. So who in God's name are we stigmatizing? Wait, you mean ourselves? And even if you don't agree with me, and frankly, I'm right, but you don't have to agree with me. Let me tell you this. Someone you love today has a disability, and you'd like them to have a break. And you'd like them to access the same things everybody else does. And if they don't think that way, they're missing the opportunity to not only care for their community, but for themselves, let alone the other two wins, because I always say there's three wins, win, 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 to everything. So if we apply that to the workplace, an employer wins, as studies show, by having a more diverse, creative, innovative, problem solving, those are the big words in the brain economy, than any other way of doing it. They've looked. Culturally, if your group is homogenous, your workplace, you will not be as creative. You will not get the same financial returns on your stocks. It's actually proven. The top 20% of companies who are considered the most inclusive in America have 15% better stock returns than the companies in the bottom 20% around inclusion.
So there's a good excuse to be more inclusive. Let me ask you, what is it that motivated you to write this book? You are CEO, you are quite busy, and then sitting down to write a book, it takes some effort, and you know, it's a totally different mind space.
It is, but I'm actually should acknowledge, I also travel around North America and I do training. That is the social enterprise of reachability. In other words, you're not going to get invited to a golf tournament and you're not going to get invited to a dinner. Not that I don't believe in fundraising, but it takes too much time. So what I did was I created a win-win-win social enterprise for my NGO, my charity, Reachability. And what it is I go and I do training and I talk and I keynote and, you know, I utilize all these sayings to affect minds in the workplace while my agency is committed 110% to developing and preparing persons with all types of disabilities to enter the workplaces across Canada. So I just wanted to make sure I was feeding both ends. And of course, it's a social enterprise, so you don't have to come to my golf tournament because I don't want to run one. I have too much important work to do. So this brings me to the book. I'm always filled with sayings. My staff always made fun of, they called them Tova-isms, but I need to watch that ego. I spoke to my therapist and we don't want to be a narcissist. So we call them inclusion-isms because that's really what they are. And my staff urged me for a few years to put them down and explain them because they're almost a folksy approach to understanding what is disability confidence and why we need it. It's the fear of disability, the lack of disability confidence that is forcing businesses to look away and actually lose, lose, lose. Mm-hmm. Because there's three wins. The employer wins with the diverse workplace. The team wins by meeting people with different perspectives and ideas and building this incredibly inclusive team and teaching your team existing that when it's their turn for supports and their own diverse needs, you'll be there. There's the second win. And the third win is the person who got the job, who's been trying forever to show that despite whatever disability they might have, they are the best person for the job. Another inclusionism, right person, right job. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm telling employers, expand your talent pool. You're not looking hard enough. Expand your talent pool if you are serious. And then I tell my HR folks, and again, another inclusionism, so I'm throwing the book at you, literally. But one more inclusionism is screen in, don't screen out. HR has to stop thinking if there's a gap in the resume, I took a year off to take care of my dying father. And quite frankly, I think employers would find that very, very, very cool in the sense that they're not going, oh, she's just lazy. It's like, wow, what integrity. She cares deeply about people and walks the walk.
I have a
So
friend.
got to do that.
I have a friend. She works for HR in a big multinational company. And anytime, I mean, not every time, all the time, she's inundated with CVs, I mean, and requests and this and that. And according to her, she has to put filters in order to exclude people. Otherwise, she told me she would never be able to do her job. So in people in these circumstances that have, I don't know, computer screeners and automatically screen out CVs, how can they be more inclusive?
Thank you, because that is a huge question. That's what I hear all the time from HR people. I can't sit here 24 hours a day and look at resumes. Here's the challenge. Studies show that software that queues in and out resumes will almost always queue out the people with disabilities and who learned skills differently. Not less. We're not talking about a surgeon. You got one way to do it. You need medical school. But a lot of the jobs we're looking for in the brain economy take creativity. And how you gain that creativity is often not as important as what you bring to the table because of your resilience and because of that innovation you've had to live with your whole life, just trying to get things done. You want that in the workplace. So what she's decided is it's easier for me to accept bias and understand that I am literally excluding a portion of my population, which in Canada is 1 in 4. I'm going to exclude 1 in 4 applicants because I just don't have time. Listen, there's a lot of ways to do things quicker, but they're not always legal. There's a lot of ways to cut corners and save time, but they're not always right. What you are doing is you are inviting, and I'll say it because the studies show it, we are inviting bias into the process if we are using software that looks for certain jobs, certain words. For instance, she might have gone to only a post-secondary that was like a university, not a, perhaps a community college. So they're only going to use the words that maybe the university use in their context, but this application was from someone who went to community college. So they're already excluded, despite the fact that their father owned that business for 35 years and they know more about mechanics than anybody in Canada. It doesn't matter. They've been excluded. And obviously, if the priority is time and not equalizing the playing field, if the priority is time and not getting the right person, right job, if the priority is time because it really doesn't matter if somebody more creative didn't come, you tell me. There's always a quicker way. I'm just not sure it's a better way.
Right. Okay. So
that's going to be my next book, Belen. It's not the better way.
Okay. So in that case, what would you suggest, to stop all the filters, or what would a person does that receive 500 CVs in a week?
No problem. So the first thing I would do is not use a software process. I would have the keywords developed based on discussion with maybe more inclusive knowledge people like myself. If you called me and said, what words would you use that won't exclude? I would stay away from larger university style words and talk more about the skill set. I'd take out words like must-haves and I'd look at should have or a combination of. Like there's words that literally cut you off at the knees. So one of the things you do is you get a little more creative about it. But the second thing you do, and this is maybe even more important, is you make connections with community agencies that specialize in employment for persons with disabilities, if that's what you're doing like I do. And they say to me, this is what we need. And I'm not dumb enough, Alan, to just send them anybody who comes through the door that isn't right person, right job, because I want a relationship with them.
Right.
So that's the quickest way.
Wow. Let me ask you, how big is this disability exclusion in the US and Canada? How big of a problem is that?
Well, I can tell you Public Service Canada is the first to admit, which is our government body that does the hiring and the single largest employer in Canada, will admit that their inclusive hiring has been dismal. And there is a new ACA, or Accessible Canada Act, that has passed. And what's really interesting is it's only been passed in 2019. Now, America, or the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed 35 years ago. So partly I feel Canada's really kind of dragged along a little bit on this one. But what I do see is it's the right time to address it, either from an ACA perspective or to re-look at the ADA and say, where do we need to be? What have we succeeded in doing in terms of equalizing the playing field for people with disabilities? And what have we not succeeded in doing? And how do we assess it? A 35-year-old bill around how to include people with disability is very different. I'll give you a perfect example. 35 years ago, oh, maybe more than that. Okay. 1950s. So, okay, 60, 70 years ago, people would drive around the neighborhood of someone who lived with polio in
Wow.
fear of getting it.
Wow.
Let's go up to 1980, you know, people would drive around the block to avoid something else we didn't know. The challenge is we have to tell people the people we're talking about, they're ourselves. And we've got to get on the game, whether it's the ADA or the ACA, whether it's America or Canada. We have a serious segment of our population. First of all, it's aging. We know already 50% of people over the age of 65 have physical disability. Just that, forget everything else. So what are we doing about including our citizens? Even if we took all the other good win-win-wins out of it, what happened to just literally slicing 1 in 4 citizens and saying, you don't matter?
Okay, you are out there in the front lines fighting for diversity and inclusion. And, you know, as popular as you are, and you have done a TED talk about it, and people love you, there are politicians who are making fun of people with disabilities. And right there in a stage in front of thousands of individuals, they are making fun of it. How do you fight against this ignorance?
Well, first of all, I make a point of connecting myself, or you could call it, as someone's closing the door, you know, you stick your foot in. That's me. I often see federal government and I'm like, oh, you know, I need to get my foot in that door and let them know what's going on from our small community, but the messaging we're sending, as you say, out across North America through the work that we do. So, and the book and all of that. And that's what I've done. I've associated myself and inputted myself, if I may, with the deputy minister in charge of the Accessible Canada Act. And I respect her and I can see that she cares. And I want to give her every opportunity and everything I've got to support our country. Now, I'm not as entrenched in America as I'm a Canadian, but I believe this new ACA, the Accessible Canada Act, is an opportunity for people just like me to stick our foot in the door and go, okay, we want to move that needle. And let me explain, there is a paradigm shift going on. The paradigm shift as it relates to disability is this. We, and I say people with disabilities, including myself, have always been looked at through the medical paradigm, meaning we are born, we are broken, and we require fixing. That's the medical way, right? You come in with a broken arm, it's broken, let's fix it. You're born with something different, it's broken, let's fix her. Right? So this idea that disability was medical and it's something that you're broken, rather than the new paradigm that we're all moving towards, and I'm pushing as hard as I can, Elaine, is the paradigm that's known as a social paradigm, but I call it a human rights one, because the idea is people with disabilities are not separate. We are all of us, and that we are deserving to have a voice, not for us, without us. No decision should be made about us unless it's about us, by us, and for us, to us, from us. You add anything you want there. Add the verbs. Wow. It's all true. We must be part of it. And that is the social paradigm that this country, and I believe the United States, is pushing toward. And whether that's because we have such a large population aging, that is pushing the point, whether it's because of legislation, whether it's because of little people like me screaming in the corners, I'm not sure. It's probably a combination of everything, but I do believe we are in a very important point. And that was another reason why I decided to push this book out now, even in the middle of all the other crises and the American election and COVID. I felt I couldn't wait any longer because it's so important we get this message out yesterday.
Yeah,
it's never not hard.
It's never too late for justice. But so your book is mostly geared towards employers, but all of us could become more inclusive in our day-to-day life. It's not just for employers. This applies to the public at large. So can you tell us how regular individuals can be more inclusive and accommodating to people with visible and non-visible disabilities?
You know what? You're right, because it's the same information, whether a business or not. I just cued it to be in business thinking because I want the businesses to open their doors up for people with disabilities who are very hungry to work there and create an even more healthy culture within their company. So of course it's geared, but everything I say, every saying, it's again that folksy stuff. For instance, I always talk about the idea pitch don't bitch is one of my staff's favorite. But what I really mean is, forget business for a minute. What I mean is, if we see something's wrong, and we can have a conversation like this, Alain, that we see something inherently wrong, even though we may never ever be successful in actually changing it, that should never stop us from trying.
Wow, that's amazing. Tova, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can people follow you?
Absolutely, and I thank you. Win, 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 the 18 inclusionisms, because that's how many I've figured out, to become a disability confident employer. And that can be gotten on Amazon.com, Amazon.ca. You want to talk to me directly, get me to come out and speak at your group, I'm ready. And you can reach me at www.reachability.org. Everything you need to know about me and what I do. I'm not on Twitter, Alain, because I'm too sensitive. I get offended. So I stay the hell off it.
Tova, thank you so much for your time.
Great talking to you, Alain. Thank you.